Hi, Catherine. So nice
Hi.
to see you. Could you just start off by introducing yourself?
Yes, my name is Catherine. I am a composer and pianist born and raised in New York City, greatest city in the world. And I started experimenting with composition around the pandemic, then wanted to learn it in a formal setting with mentors. I'm a recent graduate of the Juilliard School's preparatory division and Tanglewood and some other great programs. And currently, I'm a student at Cornell University. I study lots of things, but currently going with music, cognitive science, and information science. So, yeah, just generally interested in the ways that we think about and interact with the arts and technology. So, yeah, thanks for having me.
So, for our first question, I was wondering, do you have a process that you take when you're approaching a new composition, or are there any steps that you follow?
Yeah, I think each piece, is a different composition, so it has its own process. And much like how each piece is supposed to tell its own unique story, I think each piece usually is written in a different way for me, but what is true is that throughout all of the pieces I've ever written, they've never really started linearly. Like I've never really written them from start to finish. And I've also never really written them on paper. Like I'm always fiddling at the piano, which is the one instrument that I play, or on my laptop. But yeah, basically, I always start with one sound that I'm really drawn to for that specific piece. And it could be like 8 bars, it could be just one measure. And I really either work up to that moment or I'm working around that. It's usually honestly like the climax of the piece. Like I find like one really beautiful chord that I'm working towards. And then only after I have a little bit of all of these sketches, as I like to call them, that I like try to connect it with a story. And usually I connect it to like an emotion or something. Um, like for example, recently one of my college classes was called Music on the Brain, and it's a very classic like class that's cross-listed between psychology and music, a very common double major. But basically, the class was about how you can like what goes on in your brain for on a neuroscience level when you listen to music. But also another part of the class was like, how can you write music that intentionally like stimulates the brain? And one of the pieces that I was writing, I really wanted to include like breath and breathing because we were learning so much about like the brain's attention span. So I was really drawn to like the sound of like, how when you're meditating, like there's that like breath, like in and out. So I was just like listening to a lot of that sound and recording myself breathing. And then only then did I start composing. So
Mhm.
yeah, I feel like it's very like not linear. Like I just find a little moment and then work from there.
Are there any key musical ideas or themes that you've explored in your pieces?
For ideas, like not really. I think I definitely do have a musical sound. Like I really like writing slow pieces in big symphonic movements. It's like the second movement. That's like the slow adagio. Like that's my jam. Like I like writing what I call like these pieces that are very liminal spacey, where it's like in between something. But in terms of actual musical like techniques, I really like playing around with the pentatonic scale, which, if you're not familiar, instead of like the 8 note Western scale that we use, sorry, excuse me, um, it only uses 5 notes, hence why it's called pentatonic, and it's used a lot in sorry, it's used a lot in blues and jazz, but also actually in traditional Chinese music, which is my background. I'm Chinese Malaysian. So it sounds like it has this like exotic, mythical sound, for lack of a better word. I get to use those words. And it's very like it sounds very melodic no matter what notes you use. And I feel a lot of my inspiration is that like Asian soundscape, but also specifically like film scores that use that sound. So all the Studio Ghibli scores, they definitely use the pentatonic scale. So yeah, I don't even like consciously use it most of the time. Again, I don't really compose with a lot of theory in mind. After I write a piece, I'm able to go back and analyze what I've written.
Mhm.
But I just, whenever I sit at the piano and I start with those like chords, I usually do end up, my fingers just find their way to
Mhm.
those five notes.
Outside of the current techniques that you've been using and exploring in your compositions, are there any new directions that you want to go to or you're particularly interested in?
Yeah, I think like the first one is with film score, just because like growing up or my musical background has been mostly with classical contemporary, where you mostly write for chamber music or large ensemble or even solo, but it's not really paired with a different medium. And I think my favorite pieces that I have written are like paired with either text or art. So I think film scores could be super cool. Um, and otherwise, I would want to work more with setting text and like working with voice. Yeah, I wrote this one piece at Wildflower a couple of summers back. It's called On Earth We're Briefly Gorgeous. It's based on the Ocean Vuong novel. Have you read it?
I've read some of Ocean Vuong's poems.
Yes. So actually he's this Vietnamese American poet, but he's also a novelist, and it's really interesting when like a poet writes a novel because like like basically it's very like flowery language and it's not really like a traditional prose type thing. But it's very beautiful and I just pulled a lot of quotes from that novel and I wanted to write like a piece about it. But because Ocean Vuong is still alive, I wasn't able to use like his current text because it's not in the public domain yet. So I wrote like a vocalese instead, where it's just like oohs and ahs to get permission for that. And yeah, just like working with text and other mediums, because sometimes working with music itself can just be um not the most interesting anymore.
Mhm. When you were reading the Ocean Vuong novel, were you like, oh, I need to like compose this, something about it?
No, again, like I was saying, I read it and there were a lot of quotes that I really, really enjoyed. And I was like, ooh, that was a good quote, right? Because
Mhm.
aside from music, I also really enjoy to write. And then when I was at Wildflower, they told us, okay, you're going to write a piece for piano and voice. And then I was like, oh, okay, never done that before. So basically, I just like I also, as a pianist, don't really like writing for piano because it's like so difficult. Like
Mhm.
they're just the repertoire is so high for piano. So I like played around, I found like some melodies that I wrote, and then I was like listening to it and I was like, oh, this could vaguely be like some sort of like beautiful liminal like type of thing. And then after that, I was like, oh, I need to find a text so that my mezzo soprano can sing something. So then I did it after that. Yeah, I think it's usually advised that you start with the text or you start with an idea, but I actually start with sound.
Mm.
Um, yeah. Do you want to hear some of the piece?
Yes.
Okay. Wait, I can tell you which quote inspired it first, but I can pull it up. Um, let's see. So, did I explain what a vocalese is?
Um, could you do it
Okay.
again?
Yeah. Basically, it's just like the whole piece is like, I think it's 7 minutes, and the singer is just like singing ooh and ah and is kind of just like
Mhm.
floating. But there's one moment where she like speaks, and that'll be the moment I show you. But I can show you the score as well. Let me share my screen. Ooh. Okay. How's this? Okay. This is On Earth We're Briefly Gorgeous. Oh, this is the violin version. Oops, I switched it. Okay, let me stop. Sorry. Yeah, I later changed it to violin. It
Mm.
was less good. Uh, okay, I found it. Sorry. Studying technology, by the way. Ah, how do I? Oh, okay, here it is. Do you see it?
Yeah.
Okay, so on Earth we're briefly gorgeous. So I really liked this quote. I'm thinking of beauty again, how some things are, oh, it's supposed to be haunted. I'm dead. How some things are haunted because we have deemed them beautiful. If relative to the history of our planet, an individual life is so short, a blink of an eye, as they say, then to be gorgeous, even from the day you're born to the day you die, is to be gorgeous only briefly. And I just read that and I was like, wow, it's such a beautiful quote. I don't really know what it means, but like these words really like tickled me.
Mm.
So yeah, as I wrote in the program notes, I was just like, this was my last summer of like being a teenager, and I was just feeling all of these moments, and I was feeling all of these feelings, and this idea of like time, it moves so slow, it moves so fast. So yeah, I just wrote, it's an ode to larger than life feelings, whatever that means, I guess, girl. So yeah, if you see the whole score is very like piano and just oohs and ahs, but I'll show you in the actual recording. Okay, I have it here. Share. Okay, so I'm not gonna play the whole thing, but like this is how it begins. Okay, sorry. So she's oohing and awing because she's like an opera trained. She sounds so good, by the way. But then halfway, there's like a drop. Oh, I can't find it. Oh, okay. That's enough of that. But
Wow.
yeah, basically, I that was like the one and only time I've really worked with text and I really enjoyed it. So yeah,
I
definitely
really
want
like
to do more
the
of that. Thank you.
yeah. Okay, for our next question, in your opinion, what are the biggest challenges faced by contemporary composers and performers that are working within like this industry today?
I think in general, classical music industry, I think the biggest thing is burnout. I would still say, I feel like everybody's talked about it for so many years on end, but nothing seems to fix the fact that every year, like in one of the professional orchestras, like a lot of professional musicians will just retire or quit just because they decide they no longer want to continue with classical music. Um, And I feel like it's just because of the way that classical music education and like the profession and the industry is set up, where it's like you start from a very early age and you just like keep learning and you go to school for it. Maybe you don't have to, but a lot of people do. And at some point, you realize you're so deep in that you can't quit because it's the only thing you know. And then it's like you do it for a job. And of course, when you do something for a job, it's harder to like find the creative freedom within it. So I just think like musicians, the way that classical music is set up, where auditions are stressful, competitions are stressful, this space that is supposed to be so creative is like kind of not as like creative as you think it is, at least within performance. But that's just from my very like cynical view as a not real pianist. On the composition side, I think that also exists, but honestly, I like there's the idea that composers are a lot more free and creative. I do think it's true where you have a little more autonomy in like the things that you are creating, but there still is that pressure where it's like when you make something creative, your livelihood, you do attach it to one, your self-worth, but two, like it just becomes less of a thing that you do for fun, and you are also susceptible to burnout. So I think really it's really hard to do to fix that problem. I think everybody just needs to take care of themselves better. But I also think like I think taking breaks is a big thing. Like for me, I played piano like all my life, and at a certain point, I decided I didn't like it, so I just stopped. And luckily, I was not like doing it for a livelihood, so I got to just stop. And I found composition, which has been a little bit more fulfilling, but definitely still has its moments.
Mhm.
Um, I also think like another struggle for contemporary composers, like specifically contemporary, is that like nobody really knows what new music is or where to find it, or there's just this misconception that it all sounds really like expressionist or avant-garde, and nobody really knows enough about it because like again with that pipeline, because it's all connected. I feel like in school you learn all the way up to maybe the 20th 21st century in the classical music canon, and then we stop and we don't really like take the effort, or it's just not as normalized to like learn as much about like living composers nowadays. So that's how I feel.
Yeah, I agree. Just because like as a classical musician, I know that there's a lot of stereotypes surrounding contemporary music and playing it. A lot of the time, I feel like I expect the pieces to be very like
Yeah.
experimental, but sometimes they're actually not, and they're like very similar to like other pieces that I would have normally played.
I think it's because like a lot of composers like you start and you learn all of the classical music canon. Like you study Bach and you study four-part writing and all of these very like classical like techniques. And then you learn all of that and then you're like, well, I'm gonna write music that's the exact opposite. And then so it's like you pivot as hard as you can and you try writing like, okay, like almost as a like a rebellious thing. But then eventually you find yourself somewhere in the middle, and or you never do. Like there are lots of composers that really just do stick with, I'm going to continue like upholding this very like Wagnerian style, like opera, or some who just like want to write in the very like microtonally new music, everything. And I feel like for modern like performers, it's really hard to play like to find pieces that are similar, or like to find pieces that are representative of like all new music, because that's just not possible.
Mhm. Do you think there's any like strategies or initiatives that should be taken to kind of like minimize the stereotypes surrounding contemporary music?
Mm, I do think like it's kind of hard because nowadays when you go to a big like classical concert, the program is set up in a way where you have your big symphony, usually like Mahler 5 or something, and then the second piece is a concerto with a soloist, and then the first piece is like that like modern contemporary piece that usually is just kind of there to fulfill like a diversity quota almost. But I think a big thing is um like contemporary classical music. It's out there. I think people can find a composer that they really enjoy from like a couple of centuries ago and find like music that is reminiscent of that and almost innovating of that on nowadays. And I think like finding composers or finding spaces that create music for your niche is really helpful. And I think for that, I think a lot of composers like paying attention to program notes is really helpful because like if you find one composer that you like that writes like really cool contemporary music, you can look at their influences or their contemporaries and just reading their program notes and what they were trying to do is really helpful. Um, I think another specific strategy is just to like go to a bunch of free concerts. I feel like I've discovered a lot of the contemporary music that I've listened to just from like going to all the free things that I'm privileged from New York City, but like the Lincoln Center does a whole like Summer for the City initiative and the Met Opera does rehearsals during the summer, which they still do a lot of like classical repertoire, but still like they definitely do program a lot of like contemporary composers. So yeah, I feel like you find one contemporary composer that you like, it's pretty easy to just figure out like from there, like, oh, what other pieces would I potentially like?
No, yeah, I think I like followed like the same like pipeline because I
Yeah.
was the first contemporary composer that I heard of was Caroline Shaw.
Oh my God, yeah.
Yeah, and then I was looking for some chamber pieces that I could play, and I was just like researching like who was inspired by her. And then I also discovered Shulamit Ron. I don't know if you
Oh,
know
I
her.
don't know. I will need to get on that. But yeah, definitely like I feel like composition inspirations are really cute. Like recently, I was at the Chelsea Music Festival, which is like run by a bunch of contemporary, like not just performers, but also composers. And I heard this piece by Tanya Leon, I think. And it was actually I had heard of her work, but it was my first time listening to her music. And I remember thinking in my head, I was like, this sounds like this piece I heard at Tanglewood when Valerie Coleman came and gave a master class, like Rubispheres. And then I literally Googled Valerie Coleman, Tanya Leon, and the first Google result was like one of Valerie Coleman's like biggest inspirations is Tanya Leon. And I was like, wow, I can hear it. And that just like created like that
Mhm.
pipeline. Yeah.
Also, a lot of classical musicians, it's kind of hard for them to like diverge and try to start exploring contemporary music as well as, people who just listen to music in general kind of find contemporary music hard to understand. But are there any tips that you'd want to give them in better understanding contemporary music?
I feel like maybe not even just contemporary music. I feel like a lot of people think classical music is really boring.
Mhm.
And honestly, okay, sometimes I do sit through like a really like I'm not like a big Beethoven girl, like that's my hot take. Like sometimes I sit through a big symphony and I'm just like I get why this is important for the canon, but it's not musically stimulating. But I think for a big part of what keeps me into not just classical music, contemporary classical music, is like learning the history and learning like the lore and I feel like understanding the emotion behind a piece can help you like sit down and like it makes a piece a lot more approachable if instead of being like you don't really know the piece, but you know it's like Mozart's like Requiem and you know the story behind it and it was like, oh, he died while writing it. And I feel like that's like a big part of just like understanding classical music, I feel. Of course, if you don't think any of that history is boring, I mean, if you don't think any of that history is interesting, that's also okay. And you can just find, I feel like, at least one piece or one composer out there that you really enjoy. And again, do the same thing where you just like, you find like pieces similar to that and you just operate within that niche. Like, for example, my old composition teacher, he always pushed back whenever I wanted to write a piece that like sounded different from what I normally wrote, and he would psychoanalyze me, and he was like, "Oh, do you feel this pressure to write this piece, this like complex music because that's what composers are supposed to do?" And I was like, "Yeah, like I kind of just want to write my like my very melodic, very simple music." And he was like, "Then write it." And I feel that's like a big part of understanding like or just getting into contemporary composition is just finding the sounds that you like and sticking to it. Yeah. Oh, and just talk to living composers if you can, when you can. I'm here. Olivia's here too.
Okay, thank you so much for this interview. I learned a lot
You.
about, how to understand contemporary music, and I'm really excited to share this interview with everyone.
Yay!
Yay! Thank you. See you soon.
You.